They won't suspect a thing. Welcome, everyone, to Battle Fever J. After the utter failure of Jacka, Toei was discouraged from making any more Sentai content, thinking the concept had run its course with Go Ranger and there was nowhere else to go from there. They kept Ishinomori on board since he was still making Kamen Rider and other shows for them, but they decided that Sentai would be put on hold for the time being. Meanwhile, while on a business trip to Japan, Stan Lee, creator of some of the most influential and popular Marvel superheroes, got in contact with the CEO of Toei at the time. The two really hit it off and negotiated the idea of bringing some of Marvel's flagship heroes to Japanese audiences by making shows about them. It was agreed that Toei and Marvel would collaborate for 3 years to produce TV and movies together. The first character that Toei immediately set their eyes on was everyone's friendly neighborhood, Spider-Man. I promise this is important, please bear with me. Bringing Spider-Man over to Japan proved to be more difficult than expected. Originally, he was planned to just be a supporting character for a show starring a different protagonist, but the idea was ultimately scrapped in favor of giving Spidey his own show. The show's plot was decidedly very different from any interpretation of Spider-Man that had ever come before. Instead of the relatable and dorky nerd Peter Parker being bitten by a radioactive spider and obtaining superpowers, this show starred Takuya Yamashiro, a motorcycle racer who, after his father is killed investigating a UFO that crash-landed on Earth, is given the powers of a warrior from the distant planet Spider to defeat the evil Iron Cross army, led by Professor Monster. Yes, I know how ridiculous that sounds, and yes, I know how not Spider-Man, that is, but it was probably for the best that Toei tried to make their own spin on the Spider-Man concept instead of rehashing the backstory from the comics. And besides, the show was a massive success despite its weirdness, or maybe even because of it. And one of the things that made it so popular was how much it innovated the tokusatsu formula. At its core, this show was very similar to other shows that Toei had made, particularly Kamen Rider and Sentai. But what made it stand out was its use of something that, up to this point, had never been done before. Yes, that's right. Toei's Spider-Man was the first tokusatsu show ever to utilize giant mech battles as a major part of its formula. You heard me. You have Spider-Man to thank for giving us Megazords and Voltron. At the time, this was a huge deal. It made the show really popular because there was really nothing else like it on air. By all accounts, Toei's take on Spider-Man was huge. The show was incredibly successful, with ratings being massive and toy sales also getting a boost thanks to the giant robot. Not only that, but this show has also been given a new lease of life thanks to the internet. If you look up Japanese Spider-Man on YouTube, you'll find no shortage of hilarious clips taken from the show. Some of these can get really weird out of context. I've actually been watching it on my own time, and it's surprisingly good. Despite the bizarreness of it all, it's incredibly enjoyable. If you want to learn more about this show, I definitely recommend watching Channel Pup's retrospective video on it. After Spidey's unprecedented success, Toei instantly began thinking of what other Marvel properties they could turn into shows, and their eyes landed on the Star-Spangled Man with a Plan. Now, adapting Captain America into a Toei tokusatsu show came with a variety of difficulties, not the least of which being, how the hell do you market this to a Japanese audience? They initially thought of just localizing the concept and making it Captain Japan, which probably could have worked, but Toei knew that the reason Spider-Man worked so well was because it was different from every other show on air at the time. This show needed a hook, something to get people interested. It was then that Toei remembered a certain show they had recently pulled the plug on. What if they could fuse Go Ranger and Jacka's team show format with the giant robot concept that had made Spider-Man so successful? Well, it was worth a shot. Toei got to work on creating a new Sentai show in collaboration with Marvel. Along with that Captain Japan character they were already working on, they created a team of 4 other members, each representing a different country: France, Kenya, Russia, or Cossack in this case, and America, with the latter being based on Marvel Comics' existing Miss America character. Together they would form Battle Fever J. For all you Marvel fans, Battle Fever J actually takes place in Earth 79203 in the Marvel Multiverse, the number being derived from the air date of its first episode. So yeah, Battle Fever is part of Marvel Comics. though it is considered a defunct universe as far as Marvel is concerned. And thanks to Kamen Rider Decades screwing the multiverse, the Battle Fever world we see in anniversaries and crossovers nowadays isn't actually the same as the Marvel one. Anyway, weird multiversal tangents aside, work on the show progressed. Most of the staff from the Ishinomori era was replaced, but Shozo Uehara was still brought back as writer, along with Suzumu Takaku, who had previously worked with Uehara as co-writer for the Spider-Man show. Finally, on February 3rd, 1979, Battle Fever J aired its first episode. And this is probably the most bizarre title we've ever had for a Sentai. It's the only one to be completely in English, for one. And the name of the show also doesn't match what the name of the team is in universe. Within the show, they are simply called Battle Fever without the J. Anyway, the opening this time around is fine. It's not very memorable in comparison to Go Ranger and Jacka. It's certainly energetic enough, and there are some parts that I like quite a bit, such as the bit where they shout the Ranger's name, as well as each language's word for yes, or yay, as they put it. The beginning of the song is very reminiscent of the opening to Spider-Man, which I'm pretty sure is no coincidence. Also, unrelated side note, but I don't know when I'm going to get to talk about this again. The Spider-Man opening goes so unreasonably hard. Oh my god, it's genuinely the best Showa-era song ever. Go listen to it right now. It's amazing. The first episode is titled Assault, Run to the Ballpark. Really? That's the best title you've come up with for the first episode of your show? Go Ranger and Jacka had first episode titles that matched the fact that it was the first episode. The titles felt like the start of the show. This sounds like it could be the title for any old episode. Yeah, I know that's the biggest nitpick to ever nitpick in the history of nitpicks, but it still annoys me. The episode opens with an unknown woman walking down the street, a bright red umbrella in her hands. She walks by the National Defense Department and stabs one of the guards with a needle hidden in her umbrella, causing him to collapse as she gleefully walks away. As she walks on, she keeps stabbing more and more people. We then cut to a man running towards a car rental shop. Yeah, as long as you don't turn out like the kid from Jacka, we should be fine. The man walks in, asking to rent a car, but is told that he still needs to pay for the last time. His name isn't actually given yet, but for the sake of simplicity, this is Masao Den. He will be our Red Ranger this season. He's handed a letter with a bill supposedly on it, but instead finds an emergency summons saying, "Report to Battle Fever immediately." Next, we see a man on a horse and, "Oh, hey Kenji, how are those birds doing?" Yeah, he's not Kenji, but it is the same actor. Yukio Ito returns. This guy's real name is Kensaku Shiraishi, and he is Battle Cossack. Yes, Cossack, not Russia. Although, for the life of me, I don't understand why. Like, the other Rangers all have some connection to their represented country, but Shiraishi just kinda took on the Battle Cossack role despite being completely Japanese and never having any relation to Russia as far as the show says. Masao comes to pick him up. After that, we cut to a hair salon where a barber is cutting a woman's hair. His name is Kyosuke Shida. Masao shows up to get him, causing him to accidentally rip out a huge piece of the lady's hair. Good thing it was chosen for Battle Fever, because he probably wasn't going to be a hairdresser for much longer. Next we arrive at an animal shelter, where a peculiar man is talking to all the animals. This is Shiro Akebono, and he's the best character. He's played by Kenji Oba, who I've talked about before, and he is a legend of tokusatsu. He went on to become most famous for playing Uchu Keiji Gavan in the Metal Hero franchise, but he's actually been here for much longer, as I've already said. Anyway, one of the monkeys tells Shiro that he hasn't been fed by the owner yet. The owner kicks Shiro out of the store, launching him straight into Masao's car. How convenient. The four head inside a secret passage into the sewers, and head to their base. There, they're greeted by their commander, General Kurama, who informs them about the murders. This is starting to get very, very repetitive. No, that's not what potassium cyanide does. Potassium cyanide is a toxic chemical that stops your breathing. It actually causes your brain to stop functioning before it reaches the heart. Although I suppose if the brain stops working, then everything else does too. This is science I googled in 2 minutes. Come on, Toei. Shut up, Shida. The commander suddenly gets a phone call informing him that the suspect has been located, so the Rangers head out to investigate. All of a sudden, we cut to a soccer stadium where the woman with the umbrella walks in before being spotted and yelled at by a booming voice. She runs away but is cornered and captured by the Rangers. Once at HQ, however, they realize the umbrella doesn't have a needle on the tip. After comparing the photo, they realize they caught the wrong person. It seems this was exactly what the commander planned as he introduces the team to FBI agent Bosner from America. He speaks English, but don't worry, we have a translation box that automatically translates what he says before he even says it. Kinda like the TARDIS. Actually, funny I should mention that, they've been playing TARDIS ambiance in the background of this whole scene. It happens throughout this entire show. Also, something weird I noticed is that in all 3 episodes of this series so far, I've always had to bring up Doctor Who at least once. I don't know why, it just happened. I didn't plan for this. I kind of want this to keep being a thing, though. Let's see if I can find a Doctor Who reference in every single episode from here on out. The woman the Rangers captured is Diane Martin, a secret agent who's working with Bosmer to defeat Agos, the evil organization of this show.
Hey, let go of my ego!
Yeah, that joke is totally not tired. They're pretty much a cult who worship their evil god, Satan Agos. Jeez, they really didn't hold back with this one, huh? The organization is led by Commander Hedder, who has a hook for a hand and a cool purple cape. He was portrayed mostly by Masahi Ishibashi, who played Ironclaw in Jaka. I say mostly because he wasn't actually meant to be the original actor for this role. Hedder was originally portrayed by Kenji Ushio, who filmed scenes as him in early episodes of the show, but then he was arrested for possession of drugs, so the team had to scramble to recast him. They re-recorded most of his scenes with Ishibashi now in the role, but they couldn't redo everything, so a few scenes of Ushio still remain in the first few episodes. This is why, in some early episodes, Hedder just swaps between actors at the blink of an eye. Anyway, let's learn more about this cult. So, is it canon that Hitler was part of Agos at some point? The team questions why Diane was at the soccer field carrying that very specific type of red umbrella they were looking for. Bosner explains that it was to lure out the true killer. Wait, this guy can speak Japanese? Then what was the point of the translator? Kurama announces that Diane is to become a part of the team. Oh, joy of joys. Actually, no, she doesn't. Diane Martin's actress, Diane Martin, didn't speak Japanese, so all of her lines were dubbed over by Elisa Komaki, who previously played Peggy in Go Ranger. And boy can you tell, this lip-syncing does not match up. Diane and Bosner share a hug before he leaves for America. However, as soon as he reaches the airport, the killer is there, and she stabs him with the poison. The group is informed of Bosner's murder, and Diane reacts by storming off. As it turns out, Bosner was Diane's father, so his death hit her really hard. This could be a pretty emotional scene, but here's the problem. It doesn't hit the audience nearly as hard as it hits Diane. We got to know Bosner for a grand total of 5 minutes, during which he had 2 lines that comprised entirely of exposition. Not to mention how little screen time Diane has had, and yet the show really tries to frame this as an emotional moment. They have this whole drawn-out scene of Diane staring off into the ocean, but they give us no reason to care. If they had let Bosner live for at least a few more episodes, hell, at least a few more minutes, then maybe I'd give it to him. But he was only there for 5 minutes. They even do a flashback to the hug the two of them shared just 2 minutes prior because it's literally the only interaction the two of them have in the entire episode. When Karen's dad died at the beginning of Jaka, the show didn't treat it as a major character death, because it wasn't. It was backstory to solidify Karen's resolve to fight crime. And yeah, I know this scene is meant to do the same thing for Diane, but they really tried to make this out to be a big moment, and it could have been much more effective if they just let the guy live a little longer. Give us more interactions between him and Diane. Show us their bond before he gets killed. It could have made for a pretty engaging story. Of course, who am I kidding? It's not like it matters anyway, because Diane's character is completely forgotten about after this point. Anyway, after that whole scene is done with, the commander calls them back to the base, where he shows them a certain project they've been working on. It's not ready for use yet, though, so we'll have to wait a few more episodes. In the meantime, he gives the team their ranger suits, which they put on for the first time. So, we've gone from transforming with a cool spin while yelling the word go, to only being able to transform after getting inside this bulky pod, to just putting on the suits. No transformation, no cool sequence, they literally just put on the costumes by hand, zipper included. How have things been getting more unimpressive as the years go on? We get a bit of nightmare fuel as the commander announces each of the Rangers' names. Okay, show, if you're going to make all of your characters national stereotypes, at least use the right stereotypes. Battle France just did a flamenco dance, clap and all. This is a dance style originating from Spain, not France. It's especially embarrassing when dancing seems to be a big part of the show's identity, as you'll see. We cut back to Ago's lair, where Satan Agos senses the birth of a powerful enemy. The Rangers track down the assassin and ambush her, where she transforms into her monster form, along with a bunch of foot soldiers showing up, all carrying similar umbrellas to her. The foot soldiers are called Cutmen, and they honestly look pretty cool. They're not nearly as menacing as the Zolders or some future mooks, but this is definitely an upgrade from last season's ugly crop-top karate gis. The Rangers do their roll call for the first time, each doing a little dance to represent their country, including the inaccurate flamenco dance for France. The assassin chucks her umbrella at them and it explodes. Now that we've reached the first fight scene, we can finally talk about the suits. They are weird, different, unorthodox. One might even venture to call them bizarre. Let's start by talking about the main body of the suits, which is mostly comprised of a solid colored cloth. They're the first suits in the series to have scarves, something we'll see a lot of in the next few shows. And I've never really been a fan of scarves on the suits. They just flap around and get in the way of the action. Look at this scene where it gets on Battle France's face and he has to wipe it off. They feature matching gloves and boots, colored stripes going across the arms, and more importantly, the flag of the Rangers' represented country on their chest. These look generally pretty good. But now let's get into the elephant in the room. The helmets. These seem to be the main point of contention for people when it comes to the Battle Fever suits, and yeah, I can definitely see why. These helmets are huge, they're bulky, and worst of all, ugly as sin. Whoever thought it was a good idea to put a nose on a Sentai suit should have been fired immediately. This is also the first time we've had molded lips on suits, something which will become a recurring trend in a lot of outfits in this franchise, for better or for worse. You can tell they were going for a Jack Kirby-esque comic style with the look of these suits, which makes sense considering the Captain America inspiration. Seeing what these suits look like drawn on paper, this actually doesn't look too bad, but they do not translate well to the real world, especially not with Toei's budget. Not only are these helmets ugly, they're also inconsistent. I'm pretty sure they're meant to represent symbols of the country they're based on, but it ranges from, oh, that makes sense, to, what does this mean? Battle Japan's helmet is clearly based on the rising sun, as well as looking kind of like hair. This works. Battle Kenya's helmet features animal ears, which also works, giving not only Kenya's wide array of different wildlife, but the fact that Shiro's character is so connected to them. Then we have Miss America, who's clearly meant to look like a typical white woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. A bit on the nose, but sure. Although, do they really have to use an actual wig to represent the hair on the suit? Would it have killed them to just mold the hair onto the helmet like they did with Japan? This looks so miserable. Then we have France and Cossack. What are these even supposed to be? France's helmet has some kind of crescent moon symbol on it, which might be some kind of cultural reference that I don't get, but it still feels off. Although it kinda looks like a croissant, which I don't think is what they were going for. And Cossack looks like an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, because that's exactly what comes to mind when I think of Russia. Granted, maybe he's supposed to look like a Cossack soldier, but it also doesn't really look anything like that. Again, if there's a cultural thing I'm missing here, please correct me in the comments, because I do want to know. Overall, these costumes just don't flow. Honestly, I think Battle Japan's suit is the most pleasant to look at, if only because he has the least ugly helmet out of the bunch. And I think the solid white works really well with the red accents. On the other side of the spectrum, we have Miss America. Good God. Everything about this suit feels like it was specifically designed to look as unappealing as possible. The cheap wig on her helmet, the barely noticeable shade of pink on her suit, which makes it look like it got messed up in the washing machine, all the way down to those horrible latex gloves that look like they've never been cleaned before. Speaking of getting mixed up in the washing machine, that's actually exactly what happened with Battle France's suit. In the early episodes, the suit is supposed to look like a very light shade of blue with dark blue stripes going across the arms. However, as the show goes on, the suit becomes increasingly whiter. This is a result of the washing machine taking away the color. In future appearances of the suit, it's always pure white, even though it was never supposed to be like that. I'm gonna stop here because I could go on and on and on about how terrible these are. At the end of the day, though, I kinda love them just because of how bizarre and different they are. Yes, they're awful, but it's a special kind of awful, the one you can get enjoyment out of. And hey, at least this looks better than what we could have gotten. Early production photos showed versions of these outfits that were slightly different from the final design, and man oh man. Cossack and Kenya are the least changed, just with Kenya's ears being blue instead of green. Miss America's helmet was originally going to be blue with pink eyes instead of the inverted color scheme we got. France's half-moon thing was going to be red instead of yellow, but the most notable difference is that Japan and France were going to have gold-colored eyes, which would have just added to the inconsistency of it all. So yeah, after seeing this, I'm grateful for the suits we did get, despite how terrible they still are. This first fight scene is weird. We have a pretty normal Showa-era battle, but we constantly cut to these shots of the Rangers in civilian form performing their respective dance moves on this weird yellow background. Why? I get that dancing is supposedly a big thing in this show, but this feels really unnecessary and tacked on. It doesn't add to anything in the scene, it's just disruptive. I'll give them this though, Battle Kenny is pretty fun to watch, jumping all over the place and swinging around on this rope like Tarzan. He has plenty of fun stunts throughout the rest of the show. Fun fact, since he was already an established suit actor, Kenji Oba actually performed most of Battle Kenya's stunts himself. I also like the individual weapons each ranger gets. They're pretty unique and representative of their respective countries. Japan gets a staff, a la Aka Ranger, France gets a fencing sword, Kenya gets a whip, America gets throwing knives, and Cossack gets a pair of sais. Those last two are a bit too similar for my liking, but oh well. Then the Rangers all jump into the air and form the initials of their team name. Okay. They perform their finisher, Pentaforce, where they combine their little batons together to create a cannon. This is the first of many Sentai finishers where the Rangers combine their weapons to make a bigger, more powerful weapon. We will see this trend again a lot. They destroy the monster and the villains swear revenge as per usual. The Rangers ride on their horses, because I guess that's something they do, towards Mount Fuji, ready to take on the challenges of Agos. The ending theme this time around is very different. Instead of the fast-paced, energetic songs of the past shows, Battle Fever gives us a ballad of sorts. It's a pretty good song, but it's not the most memorable. Shumi Watanabe is once again back on the music score, and I have to say, this might be my favorite soundtrack of the Showa era. There are some great songs in here that I consider to be iconic to early Sentai. Battle Fever's soundtrack would become the basis for the next few seasons, with a lot of these tracks being reused until Watanabe left the series. I really like Battle Fever J's OST, and I think it works really well for this show. My favorite track has to be Elegy. It's the song that always comes to mind when I think about early Sentai music. In episode 2, titled Agos Monster Making Method, we got our first look at Agos Monster Making Method. For the first time in Sentai history, we have monsters being created by a machine. Where in Go Ranger and Jacka, the monsters were always either real people in suits or robots, the monsters in Battle Fever are just that, monsters, creatures created by this strange alien machine. It's something that has become a staple of Sentai, but this is where it got its start. They create their creatures by placing random objects inside this weird squishy ball and fusing it with their monster DNA juice or whatever. There's not much of note about this episode, aside from the fact that the monster straight up murders a child. Are we gonna have to start keeping count of this? We learn here that these Rangers aren't exactly the most dedicated heroes out there. With the exception of Maso, all of them are off doing their own thing and ignoring their Ranger duties. Kyosuke and Diane are partying, Shiraishi is gambling, and Shiro is helping out in an animal shelter. Well, at least he's doing something good. The other three are genuinely just slacking off. Also this. I didn't know Agos had connections with the Time Lords. I've talked about the TARDIS ambiance in the command center already, but this is way too on the nose. So basically, Toei bought a lot of their sound effects from the BBC, and with it came the TARDIS sound from Doctor Who. This is not the last time we'll hear the sound in a Sentai, and I do intend to keep track of it. Episode 3 features the very first appearance of Machiko Soga, playing the Monster of the Week, as well as its human form. Power Rangers fans will recognize Soga as the face of Rita Repulsa in the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. She is an icon of the Super Sentai series, and we'll be seeing a lot more of her in future installments. Throughout the first few episodes of the show, we've been getting small glimpses of a secret weapon being created for Battle Fever to use. I already showed a bit in the first one. In episode 4, we find out that they're building a giant robot. In episode 5, a crew member's children get kidnapped by Agos in an attempt to figure out how to destroy it. It's also in this episode that we get to see the General's sword skills in action for the first time. To make a long story short, the Rangers find and save the children and defeat the monster. But suddenly, a new, bigger robot monster shows up and starts terrorizing the city. The Rangers are teeny in comparison, and they don't stand a chance against it. They return to base, where General Tetsuzan reveals that Battle Fever Robo is complete. The Rangers hop on and fly their new ship, the Battle Shark, to where the monster is, shooting down some Agos fighter jets along the way. The Battle Shark works pretty much the same way as the Varidrine or the Sky Ace from the previous two shows. A fighter jet with versatile projectiles like lasers, missiles, and bombs. But the real show begins when the monster starts attacking the jet. The Rangers open the plane up to finally dispatch Battle Fever Robo. It is a pretty cool entrance, with the robot flying around for a bit before confronting the monster. Sure, the effects aren't great, and it looks like it's just walking on air rather than flying, but it's still cool. The mecha itself looks freaking awesome. For being the first giant robot in the series' history, I'm genuinely surprised by how good it is. They did not cheap out on this design. It looks like a samurai, it's sleek, round, and just really cool. It also comes with a large variety of different weapons, such as a sword, a shield, an axe, a chain, a lance, a staff, and more. It can even dual wield. This thing is packed with cool stuff. Despite being the first, it's also one of the most robust mechs in the entire series. How did they get it so right on their first try? They used the robot's finisher, Cross Fever, and I haven't even mentioned it until now, but Battle Fever J is a massive visual upgrade for the series. They must have gotten a higher budget this time, probably thanks to Marvel, because the effects look way better than they ever have. Also, in future episodes, we find out that the entrance into the robot is through the crotch, so make of that what you will. This episode actually aired in theaters for some reason. It's exactly the same episode with no changes whatsoever. They just played it in theaters and called it Battle Fever the movie. They did this a few times with Go Ranger too. I don't really get it. Episode 7 introduces us to Q-Taro, a talking bird, because there always has to be an annoying talking animal in these shows for some reason. Yes, Go Ranger and Jacka also had annoying talking animals. Go Ranger had a bird, and Jacka had this little mouse. I never talked about them because they added absolutely nothing to the plot, or story, or anything. The plot of the episode revolves around a young boy whose parents were killed in a fire. We learn that Shiraishi, Battle Cossack, is also an orphan and was taken in by General Tetsuzan when his parents were killed by Agos. I always like it when the Rangers have a personal stake in the battle. This is also the episode where the Rangers face off against the KKK. Yes, this happens. Episode 12 has the unique status of being the first time the giant monster has a human face. That's not really important or anything, I just needed somewhere to dump this information. In episode 15, we get a new version of the Pentacross finisher, where instead of making a cannon, the batons just sort of spin around and hit the monster like a boomerang. I personally prefer this version over the normal one, since it's more unique. The robot also gets a new finisher, where it uses its normal sword instead of the cross swords. Episode 16 features the return of Michi Love, who played Karen in Jacka. She isn't playing Karen here, but this is about the closest thing we'll get to a team-up between these two. The next actually important story episode is Episode 19, The World's Strongest Beauty, as it introduces us to another recurring character, Salome. She's an American wrestler who arrives in Japan to assist Agos, having been called by Commander Hedder. Except, we don't find out about that immediately, and they tease us with the idea of her being from a new, unrelated villain faction, even to the point of Hedder being unnecessarily secretive about her origin, and her needlessly fighting Agos foot soldiers, only for them to reveal that, no, Hedder just summoned her here. Why did you hide that from the rest of the group? What's the point of sabotaging yourself like that? Back on topic, Salome is very strong. She puts up a very good fight against the Rangers, and Commander Hedder even gets in on the fun, showcasing how powerful Agos is. Salome is my favorite villain in this show, as she was a lot more memorable than the others, and she's generally way more active. She's also the first female villain in the franchise. Surprised it's taken this long, but she's a pretty fun one to start with. Episode 23 is a clip show. This is, surprisingly, the first time we've ever had a clip show in Sentai. Even Go Ranger with 84 episodes didn't get a single one. Whether that's a good or bad thing is up to you. Clip shows are normally used as budget savers, so the fact that we have one less than halfway through the show is not a good sign. Did they blow the entire budget on the mech? Actually, that would explain some things. Episode 24, titled Tears, Diane Falls, features another big development. Diane is summoned to see the general and finds out that her little sister, Catherine, is coming to visit Japan.
Bro, are you flirting with my sister?
The Rangers head to the hotel she's staying at, but are interrupted by Salome, who proceeds to start a fight. They deduce that Agos must be targeting the hotel for whatever reason. We get introduced to the stewardess who's escorting Catherine from Japan, Maria Nagisa. She's immediately characterized as someone with a good heart who wants to help people, as she helps an old lady who fell off her wheelchair and chases down a car to stop a kidnapping, leaving Catherine alone and unsupervised. She runs into the Rangers, who recognize her from a photo the general took of her. They rightfully call her out on leaving Catherine by herself, but Shiraishi goes as far as accusing her of being in on the kidnapping. How they came to the conclusion that Agos is trying to kidnap Catherine is a mystery. Agos doesn't know Battle Fever's secret identities, so from their perspective, they have absolutely no reason to go after this random girl from America. Kyosuke is surprisingly the reasonable one, saying she might be telling the truth, but the others ignore him. That's what you get for being an annoying prick all season. Maria starts trying to fight them. Admittedly, it is a show of strength as she overpowers even Shiro, but you're not exactly helping your case like this. The general orders that she be brought back to HQ. He introduces Maria as a member of the investigation department of the FBI. That line sounds very different without the context of Kenya being a ranger. Apparently, Maria was trained by Diane's father, the one who died at the beginning of the show. We get a quote-unquote heartfelt moment of Diane and Maria remembering him, but again, the show hasn't given the audience a reason to care about this guy's death. Maria promises that she'll find Catherine no matter what, even though it was her own incompetence that caused her to get kidnapped in the first place. The group suspects that Catherine's kidnapping was part of a mass kidnapping spree that's been going on recently, where the victims were killed and completely drained of their blood. The monster in this episode is, fittingly, a vampire. Back with Agos, Salome rips a locket away from Catherine. She immediately figures out that Diane is Miss America because... did they know Catherine was in any way related to a Battle Fever member? Wait, if you didn't even know that, then why did you kidnap her? They had no idea she was related to Diane, and they only come up with a plan to use her as bait after the fact. What were they planning to do with her in the first place? So, Battle Fever find out about Catherine's kidnapping, and we get some of the most wooden acting I've ever seen in this show from Diane, who doesn't look in any way concerned that her sister is in danger. Diane wants to go save her sister, but the team is worried that she'll be caught in a trap since Agos knows her identity. Maria elects to guard her, because I'm sure you, a normal person, are perfectly capable of guarding a literal superhero from danger. Don't get me wrong, Maria has proven to be a strong fighter, but she hasn't fought any of the Rangers in suit yet, so I'm not sure how she'd fare. Also, the letter Agos sent specifically said for Diane to come alone, which is why none of the other Rangers can come with her, but I guess Maria is fair game in Agos' eyes? Upon heading to where Agos told them to go, Maria sees the old lady in a wheelchair she helped earlier rushing towards Diane, and it turns out she was actually the monster the whole time, stabbing Diane. This is honestly the best plot twist ever. The other Rangers jump into action, with Maria also getting in on the fight, but it's too late, as Diane is taken. She reunites with her sister, and Salome interrogates her on the location of Battle Fever's headquarters, threatening to kill them both if she doesn't comply. She makes true on her promise when Diane refuses to give her information and the monster stabs her with the spike that drains her blood. Diane lies, saying the location is written in her locket. Salome opens it, and it explodes. That's actually a surprisingly clever trick. She sends out a red firework informing people of her location as she tries to escape. Maria finds the two sisters and leads them out as the other Rangers show up to fight. This fight scene features two of the Rangers just shooting down foot soldiers with guns! This, coupled with Spider-Man pulling out a machine gun in the Toei show, really says something. I don't know what, but something. They put up a good fight, but Diane's injuries stop her from joining in, and the team can't use their finisher if they're missing a member. In order to give their team a fighting chance, Diane tells Maria to become Miss America instead of her, giving up her powers to a more capable person. Maria takes on the role of Miss America and joins the fight alongside the other Rangers. They bring out Battle Fever Robo and take down Dracula. Back at the base, Diane announces that she's returning to America since it's dangerous for her to stay in Japan now that Agos knows her secret identity. Realistically, that reasoning makes some sense, but Go Ranger and Jacka had their identities blown all the time and they never had to stop being Rangers. Regardless, Diane says her goodbyes and Maria becomes the brand new Miss America for the remainder of the show. Alright, I've got quite a bit to say, but let's start by discussing the episode on its own merits. It's fine. It's not great, but as far as emotional episodes go, this is about the best you'll find in this show, with really only one exception that we'll talk about later. We'll talk more about Maria in the character section when we get to that, but for now, let's talk about Diane. One of the main reasons this episode doesn't really work for me is because of Diane herself. Now, in this episode, Diane is fine. Dare I say, even good. Her motivations for leaving the team are sound, wanting to be with her sister, and she spends enough time with Maria that I can reasonably believe she would entrust her with replacing her on the team. You know, unlike a certain other Ranger replacement episode. The problem is the everything else. I haven't gotten into this yet because I've been saving it up until now, but Diane Martin might just be the most worthless Ranger in this franchise's history. Throughout the last half of the show, Diane has not had a single focus episode, and she spends most of her time slacking off and doing her own thing. The main reason for this is because, as I've already touched on briefly, Her actress of the same name didn't speak Japanese, which is why they had to have Lisa Komaki dub in all of her lines. But the problem isn't just that she wasn't fluent in the language, it's that she was never there. More often than not, Diane wasn't available for filming, which resulted in her just not being there most of the time. In fact, there are several episodes of the show where Diane straight up doesn't appear outside of fight scene stock footage dubbed in by Lisa Komaki. In episode 20, the team needs to access the women's dorm room to find someone they need to get information out of. Logically speaking, Diane should easily be able to access the dorm, but because of this aforementioned circumstance, the show has to act like she doesn't exist, and getting into the dorm is a challenge. Diane is so non-existent that it actually serves the plot. I'm confident that she has the least amount of screen time out of any ranger in the franchise, at least in terms of actual main rangers in the show. I don't know for sure, I haven't done the math, but I'm confident. Maria isn't an amazing character or anything, but my god is it a night and day difference. But just because Diane is gone doesn't mean Lisa Komaki is, because she hilariously makes a guest appearance in the very next episode. That's just funny. Her soul has escaped the fleshy prison of Diane Martin. This is actually Komaki's last appearance in the Super Sentai franchise, so it's bittersweet for my favorite of the Go Ranger cast. So, the entire reason Diane left the team was so Agos wouldn't know the identity of one of the Rangers. In episode 26, Agos figures out the entire team's identities, so that was pointless. Granted, the whole identity thing wasn't Diane's only reason for leaving, but still. To be fair to Agos, it's a pretty smart plan. They send a monster to a bunch of previous battle locations and analyze the footprints on the floor to find a match. How those footprints are still there even weeks after the battle is beyond me. Where it gets even more ridiculous is when the monster figures out how the Rangers dress and discover their identity by matching their clothes. This runs on cartoon logic that the characters wear the exact same clothes every day, and it's just stupid. From this point on in the show, Agos officially knows the Rangers' secret identities, meaning they have to be more careful with their civilian lives. No episode proved the dangers of their secret identities being out in the open more than episode 33. While on patrol, Shiraishi visits a little girl, who we learn is the daughter of Professor Mimura, who was Shiraishi's mentor. He also meets this dude, Jin Makoto, played by Daisuke Ban, who also portrayed the Red Ranger in Ninja Captor of all things. He was Shiraishi's rival during their military training, and he was an incredible shot. The professor says he's almost done creating a secret drill missile weapon for battle fever. You'd think creating a massively powerful weapon in your basement would attract some kind of attention, but oh well. Shiraishi and Jin decide to go fishing together, but are stopped at the door by Salome. Looks like the secret wasn't as well kept as they thought. Salome threatens the professor into giving her the weapon's blueprints. In a surprising turn of events, the professor refuses, so she orders the foot soldiers to wreck the place. Strangely, she doesn't order them to, kill Mayumi, despite the fact that they had her at gunpoint specifically for the purpose of using her as a hostage. Shiraishi transforms and saves the kid, but Agos escapes with the blueprints. To make things worse, the professor is shot and killed. Battle Fever search the city in hopes of finding the missing blueprints, while Agos gets to work building the thing. At the hospital, Shiraishi finds a letter from Jin, announcing that he's leaving because he's suspected of being a spy for Agos. Things don't get better when little Mayumi starts accusing Shiraishi of being a murderer. This is a surprisingly unique conflict that I don't think I've ever seen explored in a Sentai before. We have to remember that despite all of their monster-making and evil deeds, the members of Agos are all human beings. This isn't like later Sentai shows where the foot soldiers are nameless monsters or clay creatures or robots or whatever. The people the Battle Fever team takes down every episode are just that, people. Human beings with their own lives and families. We don't know why they decided to join up with the villains. Maybe they needed the job to support their families and had nowhere else to turn to. Or maybe they were simply brainwashed to comply. This was true for Go Ranger and Jacka too, but it's never been brought to the forefront like this. The rest of the team splits up to investigate. Shiro and Shida find Jin in an abandoned warehouse, and he leads them to the Agos base. One question, how did he know where the base was? Doesn't it just make him even more suspicious of being a spy? Shiraishi's still hung up on what Mayumi said before, so he goes back to visit her in the hospital. Shiraishi reminisces about his own father figure who was killed when he was a child. He decides that he can't abandon Mayumi, so he tries his best to bond with her. Next day, Shiraishi decides to take Mayumi on an outing to cheer her up. He purposely leaves behind his Battle Cossack suit so as to not scare her. However, as Mayumi finally seems to be happy, trouble arises. Agos arrives and holds Mayumi hostage while Shiraishi went out to grab drinks. He tries to attack them and manages to save Mayumi, but ultimately can't do much without his suit. The Cutmen shoot him down easily. Jin finds him and takes out the Cutman while the rest of the team shows up with his suit, but it's too late. Satisfied with having been able to make Mayumi happy, even if just for a little bit, Shiraishi draws his last breath, surrounded by his friends and teammates. The remaining four salute him, and Jin takes the Battle Cossack suit, promising to avenge his fallen friend. He goes out and absolutely massacres a bunch of cutmen. The other members show up to help, but they can't do much when they're missing a member. In order to help the team, Jin takes on the mantle of Battle Cossack, giving them the advantage they need. Blah 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 battle blah 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 mech, and the monster is defeated. The team holds a funeral for Shiraishi and welcome Jin as the new Battle Cossack. So, yeah, Shiraishi's gone. This obviously changes the status quo quite a bit. Unlike a certain other character death we've talked about here, Shiraishi's death is actually somewhat emotional. We've been spending time with him consistently for the last 33 episodes, so seeing him get gunned down so coldly and brutally like this definitely makes you feel something. Sure, it's not like Shiraishi was an amazing character or anything. He was pretty boring, even if he had some nice moments. But this is still leagues above episode 1, trying to make us feel for a character who was on screen for 5 minutes. It also helps that it comes out of nowhere. Unlike, say, Daigoro from Go Ranger, Shiraishi doesn't heroically sacrifice himself to save the day or anything. Sure, he dies protecting Mayumi, but it isn't treated as some big heroic moment for him. He was just enjoying a fun day out when a bunch of soldiers came in and gunned him down. It's tragic and unfair, and the show treats it as such. Granted, the episode had pretty much been hinting at his death the entire time, so much so that the title of the episode is Cossack Dies for Love. I just refrained from telling you that until now for the sake of suspense. This is probably the most brutal and realistic death of a main character we'll ever get in this franchise. Like, most deaths in this show, as far as the Rangers are concerned, are caused by supernatural causes like lasers, electrocution, the monster's sheer strength, but we actually see Shiraishi get gunned down with actual bullets. The episode also does a good job of establishing Jin as a character and giving us a good explanation for why he should be the one to take up the mantle. He was Shiraishi's best friend, so he wants to do everything he can to avenge him. So in the next episode, he immediately leaves the team. Okay, it's just a ploy so he can go out on his own and destroy the monster for personal reasons, but I just think it's absolutely hilarious. This is kind of a big thing for his character. He'll often go off and do his own thing without elaborating, only for it to turn out to have been an extremely clever trick to take out the monster. Episode 37 features the first ever case of the general mentor for the season actually fighting the monster, Bamba excluded. Sure, we've had instances of them going out and helping the Rangers with a plan, or even getting some hits in on a few soldiers, but General Tetsuzan actually goes out and cuts down the monster himself. I haven't really talked about the General that much, because he's a pretty uninteresting character overall, but that is badass. Episodes 43 and 44 are some of the best in this show. Both of them feature great character development for Shiro and Masao specifically, with Shiro confronting an old friend of his who became an assassin working for Aegos, and Masao revisiting his hometown and saving it from being enslaved by Aegos. It's really nice to get some actual development for these guys, since we've had barely anything in the rest of the show, especially Masao. We're now at the beginning of the end. Episode 50 is the beginning of the 3-episode finale arc for the show, starting with the masked demon who aims for the general. Commander Hedder decides to personally target General Tetsuzan by attacking people close to him. Probably the smartest plan the villains have had all season, given that they know the Rangers' identities. He starts by killing Kurama's martial arts teacher, provoking Battle Fever to react. Tetsuzan decides that he needs to go out and give Hedder the fight he wants. The Rangers try to fight Hedder themselves, but Satan Aegos sends out a monster to keep them busy. In a further attempt to provoke the general, Hedder kills one of his closest friends, prompting Tetsuzan to finally take action. The Rangers try their best to talk him out of it, but he isn't listening. This is probably the best characterization we've had for any of the generals in the series so far. Too bad it really wasn't there until this episode. Tetsuzan decides that he will go to fight Hedder on his own, no matter what. He goes to meet with him, and we get one of the most badass scenes in the series so far, with Tetsuzan fighting a ton of enemies all by himself and ending with a standoff against Hedder. They fight, with Hedder hilariously using his hook instead of a sword. This is overall probably the best fight scene in this show. This is the first time we've had such a major sword fight in this scale, and it's awesome for what it is. Hedder gets a hit in by playing dirty and throwing sand in his eyes, but Tetsuzan doesn't care. He just fights with his eyes closed like he's Daredevil. He cuts off Hedder's hook and kills him, and Hedder is totally dead for real, guys, I promise. For the first time in the series, the commander actually takes down one of the villains all by himself, and it is amazing. Meanwhile, the team defeats the monster in the mecha. They head back to base and celebrate their victory, but it won't last long as Aegos is prepared to strike back. This leads to episode 51, Aegos Revival Ceremony. Aegos holds a revival ceremony for Hedder. They perform a ritual where they suck him into the monster-making machine. He comes out as Hedder Monster, and this thing is really weird looking. It's literally Hedder as a big monster suit. He also talks like a robot, which just adds to the creepiness of it all. Like, this used to be a person. A really bad person, but still. It's pretty creepy. At least, at first. For some reason, as soon as he goes out to fight Battle Fever, he starts talking more like a generic monster. I wonder if maybe Toei thought the original version was a little too creepy and decided to change it at the last minute, but didn't really have time to change the first scene. He uses his psychic powers to revive a bunch of giant robots from past episodes. This immediately sets the stakes pretty high for the final battle. I'm excited to see where this goes. The Rangers head out in Battle Fever Robo to fight, but are understandably overwhelmed by the amount of opponents. They use their finisher, but it just bounces right off. None of their attacks seem to work, but they eventually realize that fighting Hedder head-on, no pun intended, is their best bet at getting rid of the other threats. It's a tough fight as Hedder blocks most of their attacks and eventually hides, leaving all the giant monsters around to wreak havoc. It seems like all is lost, but the Rangers find Hedder. They do their Pentaforce finisher and blow him up, causing all the monsters to disappear. That's it? So Hedder's just dead again? Regardless, a weird eye thing attaches itself to Shiro's boot without him noticing, as Salome watches from afar. The five head back to base, and the bird notices the eye, but no one has any idea what he's talking about. Later that night, the eye starts moving around. The bird starts screaming about it again, waking up Shiro. It forms itself and becomes Hedder Monster again. He starts sneaking around the base, eventually reaching the commander's room. It tries to stab him, but is bamboozled as Tetsuzan appears. Did I mention that this guy is a badass? The rest of the team awakens as well. They corner Hedder, but it turns out he's attached a bomb to himself that he plans to detonate, taking the entire base, as well as everyone in it, down with him. He then suddenly manages to revert back to his original form, so all of that initial creepiness from the first scene is just completely gone. Regardless, the commander doesn't waver. He commands the bird to freeze Hedder, stopping the bomb, because I guess he can do that now. This is why I had to introduce Kyutaro earlier. Unlike the talking animals in the last show, he's actually kinda relevant. This is something the next season will do even better. The team brings Hedder's frozen body outside and they shoot heat rays at him, vaporizing him completely until he's turned to ash. That's really hardcore. He does manage to summon a giant robot right before he dies though, so they go ahead and deal with that. I feel like this highlights a problem that's going to be very prominent throughout the next few shows. The mech fights can feel really tacked on at times. Like, from a narrative perspective, the battle could have just ended when they vaporized Hedder. We really did not need the giant robot. It just feels really forced because we have to adhere to the formula. This is a problem that Sentai deals with a lot overall, but it's especially bad in the Showa era. Anyway, with Hedder actually dead for real this time, we can move on to the final episode, the Symphony of the Heroes. At Agos' lair, Satan Agos reflects on the recent battles and Hedder's death. He decides it's time to bring out their final plan. It turns out they've been working on an earthquake machine, causing random earthquakes all over the city. The team decides to investigate as more and more strange occurrences continue to happen. All of a sudden, they get a phone call from a mysterious woman telling them to meet at the park. She says she has information about the location of Agos' secret lair. She's not willing to give this information out for free, though. In a surprise turn, they figure out that the mysterious girl is actually Salome. She's seemingly going against Agos and selling information. The team naturally suspects that this might be a trap, but this is also their best shot at attacking Agos head-on. They meet up with her once again, but she's suddenly attacked by Cutman. They bring her to a hospital where she reveals Satan Agos' plans. She apparently left because she feared for her own life in there. She gives the Rangers the map to their lair so they can get in. Using the map Salome gave them, they leave for Agos' headquarters. They reach the cave entrance and fight off some Cutmen to get inside, where they find a dead end. What exactly was your plan there? They use their batons to blast open the wall, revealing an entrance to the main room, where they come face to face with Satan Agos. He opens the door, where out comes Salome. It turns out she didn't actually betray Agos and just gave him the map to lure them into a trap. Satan Agos reveals he wants to create a Battle Fever monster. The monster-making capsule comes to life, attacking the Rangers and sucking them in. I'm sure for the time this is a really cool effect, but it really hasn't aged well. They obviously just overlaid two different cameras on top of one another, and it shows. The Rangers realize they've been shrunk down, so they try to use their weapons and destroy the machine from the inside, but it doesn't work. As they're running out of time, however, they conveniently see the creature's heart in the distance. They use Pentaforce to destroy it, where it vomits them out in the process. It's not over yet, though, as Satan Agos flies off, where the Rangers follow him, leaving Salome to die alone. That's surprisingly cruel. Satan Agos takes on a giant form, destroying everything around him in the process. The Rangers launch Battle Shark to combat him, and they immediately go for the finisher, Cross Fever, but it just bounces right off. With their special move rendered completely ineffective, this seems like it's going to be a hard fight. They then decide to use their other special, the lightning sword, and they stab through him immediately. And he dies. God damn it! Are you serious? Why can't we have at least a single decent final battle already? This episode was doing fine, it was good. Why did they have to drop the ball right at the end? No, shut up! You don't deserve to say that! That battle was easy as hell!
You didn't grow, you didn't improve. You took a shortcut and gained nothing. You experienced a hollow victory. Nothing was risked and nothing was gained. It's sad.
At least Go Ranger and Jacka took longer than 2 hits to defeat their final boss. This is honestly kind of insulting. The narrator signs off the episode as the Rangers ride off into the sunset. Fun fact, this very last shot of them on the horse is actually taken from the ending theme, meaning Diane and Shiraishi get to make one last appearance, so that's nice. How do I even unpack this? The episode was honestly doing pretty well until the very end. It genuinely feels like the writers were originally planning to have just one more episode before Toei cut them off and told them, no, Denjiman starts next week, you gotta wrap this up. So they just completely rushed the final fight against Satan Agos. I mean, at least he was still more impressive than Shine, but that's a low bar. I feel like this problem could have been avoided if they just cut out the whole robot Hedder thing from the previous episode. That whole plotline doesn't really add up to anything anyway. They should have just had that episode end with the Rangers reaching Ego's lair, so we could dedicate the entire finale to taking on the big bad. But alas, this is the end of Battle Fever J. Even though I don't really like this show, I'm still angry at how bad this finale was. Like, this feels like a complete shock to the system. I don't even know how to continue the video after this. Guess we'll just move on to talking about the characters. Starting with our red, Masao wasn't really anything special. He was played by Koki Tanioka, and he was once again the standard leader archetype that Tsuyoshi and Sakurai embodied, but he's somehow even less interesting. The former two at least had interesting stories at the beginning of their series, and Sakurai had a little bit of development near the end with Karen, but Masao was very much just a blank slate all throughout this show. The only real piece of development he got was the aforementioned episode with his hometown, which was quite good, but there's really nothing else. Next we have Kyosuke Shida, Battle France, portrayed by Yuhei Kurachi. He was extremely annoying and obnoxious. When he wasn't slacking off and ignoring his duties, he just made really unfunny remarks and tried to get with various women. I also just don't like his performance. I'm sure the actor is a great guy and all, but every time he speaks, he sounds like an arrogant douchebag. I think he's supposed to sound flamboyant, which matches up with the French stereotype they're clearly going for, but it just comes off really dickish. Battle Cossack, at least the second one, Jin Makoto, was played by Daisuke Ban, as I've said. He was very one-note. He was a lone wolf, he often went out on his own without telling the others, but he still cared about fighting evil. I'd say he was a more interesting character than Shiraishi, but I still kinda liked Shiraishi more. Makoto's shtick got boring after a while, and he never really got the same type of development that Shiraishi did. If we want to talk about someone who was way better than their predecessor, we have Maria Nagisa, played by Naomi Hagi. In her first few episodes alone, she immediately proved herself to be way more capable and useful than Diane ever was. It is really a night and day difference. On her own merits, she's kinda just okay. She plays the same role of action girl that Peggy and Karen did before her, but I think those two had a bit more development as well as better focus episodes. Overall, I like Maria, but she's nothing special. Now we get to the highlight of this cast, Kenji Oba as Shiro Akebono, aka Battle Kenya. He was the comic relief character, playing the same role that Daita did in Go Ranger. His most defining feature was his love of animals, something that played a big role in all of his focus episodes. Kenji Oba does a great performance here. It honestly reminds me a lot of Daita, where you can tell he's just happy to be there. He also had the most interesting fighting style, where he would imitate multiple animals in his attacks. Overall, he was just a really fun and unique character. As for the villains, Agos was pretty much just another generic evil faction in the same vein as the previous shows. But otherwise, they're not too notable. I thought Hedder was pretty cool, and I liked his rivalry with the Commander towards the end. And I also just really like his actor. The second one, not the one who did drugs. However, the highlight of the villains in this one was definitely Salome, portrayed by Maki Ueda, who was actually a female wrestler at the time she was cast. Not only is she our very first female general, she's also just really badass. There were a lot of times in the show where she went to fight the Rangers head-on, something you don't really see a lot of in these early shows. Most of the time, the main villains just kind of sit around in their base and let the monster of the week do the dirty work. So Salome was a really nice change of pace. It's a shame how she ended up buried under a bunch of rubble to never be mentioned again, though. Overall, Battle Fever J has a lot of issues that stop me from calling it a good show, but there are quite a few things that I like about it. There are some episodes here that are genuinely really good, and this show obviously brought a lot of new ideas to the Sentai series that would go on to become staples. I'd even go as far as to say it saved the franchise from an early grave. If it hadn't been for this show, it's very likely the Sentai franchise would have died with Jacka. I think I've done a decent job in this video of highlighting the good parts of this show as well as the bad. It's clear that audiences back then really enjoyed it, as ratings were significantly higher than they had been during Jacka. Thanks to this, the Sentai series was once again renewed. This time, Marvel would take a back seat to the actual production of the show, despite still offering their support per contract. The show would also have to differentiate itself from Battle Fever in multiple ways. After all, it was now 1980, and a new decade meant times were changing. Now that we've talked about all three of the 70s Sentai, I want to take a moment to look back and reflect on this decade and what it meant to the franchise as a whole. If I had to describe this era of Sentai in one term, it would be growing pains. 1975 to 1979 were the formative years of Sentai, and you can tell it took a while for them to find their footing. Really, none of the three shows in this decade were originally meant to be a part of the Sentai series, barring maybe Jacka. As I mentioned in my first video, Go Ranger was initially pitched as a spin-off of Kamen Rider, just a side project to support the main attraction. Eventually it developed into its own thing, but it struggled to find its footing for a while. I think the thing that really connects the 70s shows for me is the military motif. From Go Ranger to Battle Fever, every show has followed a military organization assembling a team of skilled soldiers to take on an opposing force. The Black Cross Army, Crime, and Agos are all very similar in concept, and you can tell the idea was derived from Ishinomori's other works, like Black Ghost from Cyborg 009, and especially Shocker from Kamen Rider. Now that Ishinomori wasn't working on Sentai anymore, though, his style of writing would slowly begin to fade out. It was still present in Battle Fever, but this was much more of a transitionary season. From the first episode of Go Ranger to the last episode of Battle Fever, there's been a gradual evolution to the series. It's been really interesting watching it grow into mostly the show we know today, and it's still not quite there yet, but with Battle Fever J, it seems for the first time that Toei finally figured out exactly what Sentai is. Now that the series was once again in full swing and the contract with Marvel was still going, Toei wanted to go in a completely different direction, fitting for the completely new decade. A direction that would go on to define said decade. So, did Toei once again manage to recapture that spark? Let's find out next time, with Denshi Sentai Denji Man.
Salaba, Battle Fever 対さらばバトルフィーバーロボットよ。
As for the villains, Agos was pretty much just another generic